Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Radiantly Awakened podcast. I am here with Ryan King, and I'm so excited for today's podcast. I would say it's a little bit different than the rest of the podcast. We're going to into a topic that we haven't yet gone into in the podcast at all, I don't think. So I'm super excited for that. So, a bit about Ryan before he introduces himself. Ryan is a former college baseball player and the founder and CEO of his own tech company. He can be found on Instagram, where we met. His Instagram handle is The Wisdom of Kings, and he writes amazing content on masculinity, relationships, fatherhood, personal growth, and yeah, I'm just so honored to have you on here, Ryan. So thank you so much for being here. Did you want to say hello, introduce yourself further?
I think you pretty well covered it, but hello.
Yeah, glad to have you on here. I mean, your writing
Yeah,
is
I'm glad to
so
be here.
inspiring. I love every
Thank
single
you.
time you put something out, I'm like, oh, so good. So, I mean, what inspired you to start?
Um, there's a long version and a short version. The short version is I feel like I want to be a voice of reason amidst the madness. Um, just as an outsider, you know, I think we all know what I mean by that. Um, I was never, um, I was never on Instagram or really, I mean, I would look at Twitter a little bit for sports stuff, but Um, I just wasn't ever a big social media consumer, and I certainly wasn't a social media producer. So, um, just the last few years, I've been trying to figure out what I wanted with my next phase of kind of my life. My business is kind of stable at this point. Been semi-retired since I was 35, and it's not something I really um, have a lot of interest in growing any bigger. And so for me, it was just looking for something else to kind of pour myself into that I actually did care about. And so, um, yeah, I'm still pretty new. I don't really know what I'm doing on Instagram, or like I've never written anything before. So the response has been way more than I ever expected. It's been kind of overwhelming. Um, and I just feel like I'm kind of drinking out of the fire hose. It's like just so much coming at me way quicker than I ever expected. So, um, it's very humbling to get the kind of response that I've gotten on some of the stuff that I've written, because I really had no idea what to expect. So
Yeah. Well, you can tell like the what's the word I'm looking for? It's the effort, the heart, the I'm gonna go with precision that goes into the creation of these posts. I mean, like it's just refreshing. It's almost like a remembrance because within today's society, I'm pretty sure a lot of us can agree that what it is to be a man, the topic of masculinity, the topic of femininity even, it's so confusing. Like it's almost like inverted in society, right? And it's so confusing. So I mean, your page is so inspiring, your writing is so inspiring. It's almost just like a remembrance and it's like refreshing and needed. So thank you.
thank you. I love that description. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, like going into that in like society, the I don't know if roles is the right word, but just the energy of like what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman, masculine, feminine roles in society have really been a bit all over the place. What's your take on this?
Um, for me, I try to think about it less of what the roles should be, and what society is saying, and all that stuff. Like I said, I've never read a book on I've read one book on masculinity.
Hmm.
I've read one. I haven't read any books on relationships.
Wow.
So I feel like part of when people say it's just like something different that they've never heard before, I think that's part of where that comes from. Is it's just brand new,
Mm.
uh, not getting it from anywhere, repurposing anything. And as far as the roles, I'd never really even thought about the term role or gender role or any of that stuff before I started writing.
Hmm.
For me, I just observe a lot of where I get kind of the inspiration for what I write about is more just observation on Just when we're not pretending and we're not playing a role,
Hmm.
how do we tend to behave? What do we tend to be drawn to? What are just our natural kind of things that aren't, especially, and I look at, I have two younger boys, they're 11 and 13. But then just watching them grow up, and then I have like, and my boys are, like I said, 11 and 13, but I have a niece that's just turned 5.
Hmm.
Um, and just watching how different she is as a little girl is so drastically different than the way my boys were when they were little. And so
Hmm.
I try to separate what, all the dialogue around gender roles and all that stuff. I try to separate that from just like, what am I observing is just actually happening in the heart of like a little boy and versus a little girl, and what do they just naturally gravitate to?
Hmm.
Um, and so that's kind of my take on a lot of the gender role stuff. Is it's gotten confusing because there's just so much there's so much stuff out there that's, to me, is just a distraction. Like a lot of it's just really simple. Like, what does a woman really just want?
Mm.
Instead of being told what she wants, like what is the natural inclination of a woman in a relationship,
Hmm.
um, and vice versa with a man. Like what is just deep down in our hearts. And I try to compare it not just to what's modern, but a lot of my reading, I said I haven't read a lot of books on masculinity and relationships and stuff like that, but I've done a lot of reading just in general, of history, fiction, a lot of stuff, and there's just common themes
I'm
about,
laughing
you
because
know
right now, everyone, I'm looking at Ryan. He's sitting in front of this packed bookshelf,
yeah.
telling me that he's done a lot of reading. I'm like, yeah, I can see that. Sorry for
Yeah.
interrupting. Keep going.
No,
Sorry.
you're good. You're good. And a lot of the books that I have up here, I haven't even had time to read. I have this huge library, and most of my reading I do on my phone because it's always with me. Physical copy books, I don't end up reading very often because it's like I'm not usually in a position to just sit and read a physical book. But so for me, a lot of where my, I, I don't know, my writing on, masculinity and femininity comes from is really just kind of comparing, like, my observations of what's going on right now in the real world and my interactions and just life experience with my wife and my employees and, my customers. I've had thousands and thousands of interactions with men and women, in a sales environment, and so the way I communicate with men is very different than the way I communicate with women. There's two different ways that are effective, right? Um, and so between that, and then I try to find, everything that I'm writing, I try to just compare it to, historical examples and mythology, and just what are the common themes that are shared across cultures, across time, and how do we get back to remembering what those things are, in spite of all the noise that we're hearing,
Mm.
in the modern day. And some modern day stuff holds up, and some modern day stuff doesn't hold up.
Mm.
Um, and so for me, um, that's kind of where a lot of my ideas on, I guess, gender roles come
Mm.
from. Like I said, that's a new term for me. I've never really thought of it like that.
Yeah.
It's just been more for me. It's always just been more practical.
Mm.
If I'm going to go, if I have a presentation to make to a woman, there are just certain things that I've learned to do differently than when I'm making a presentation to a man that are more
Mm.
effective. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I love that. I
so
love that explanation. And it like I really don't like the term gender roles, but I think for like the brain to try I don't know what else
you
to
got to,
label
yeah,
it as, but I like
sure,
what you
yeah,
said, coming back to that simplicity that like this is probably going to trigger some people. Sorry in advance. That sort of like natural, like what it is to be a little girl, what it is to be a little boy. I love that.
yeah,
Yeah, I really can appreciate that. You said something really interesting, and I want to
all
dive
right.
into it a bit more. I loved what you said about the distinction between when I'm talking to a man, I communicate differently than when I'm talking to a woman. Can you elaborate on that?
Um, yeah, I can try. I haven't. What's funny is that a lot of the stuff that I write about, I don't really know how to explain it out loud until I write it.
Uh-huh.
Um, so if I've already written about something, I'm pretty precise and clear, like you said. I haven't really thought about that specifically. I know when I'm talking to a man, I'm a lot shorter. Men don't care about a lot of details. Um, I'm just very direct. I'm very, here's what's in it for you. Here's, what makes sense. Here's
Hmm.
what doesn't make sense. Whereas with a woman, I try to tell more of a story and lead them through kind of the inside my mind more. I share like my thought process more than the outcome.
Mm.
Um, whereas with a man, I'm very direct and say, here's the information. Here's what I would do if I was in your position. What
Hmm.
do you think? And just kind of, whereas, like my wife, it's funny because we'll watch like a documentary like Hard Knocks about the NFL. Like we don't watch it anymore, but I remember years ago, she would watch Hard Knocks with me, and it was about the NFL. And for the rest of the year, she wanted to watch that team because she knew the quarterback's wife and his kid, and so she felt like she had a connection to the players, so she wanted to root for them.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so she would watch football, but for totally different reasons than a man watches football, right? So
Wow.
I just think there's just those are the kinds of things that I didn't make that up. I'm not looking for that information to like categorize her as being different as a woman. It's just like she's more interested in the relational part of knowing the background of the person in
Mm.
order to be able to root for them. Whereas I'm looking at I root for the teams that I like or the players that I like for completely different reasons, right? So um, I don't know if that's a good explanation, but it's just I've just learned that there's different things that women latch onto that matter to a woman when you're communicating, and they're just different than what matters to a man. And if you want to be an effective communicator, you got to learn how to appeal differently. Um, and there's just different types of appeal for different things.
Mm. Yeah. I love that example so much. I was like, that makes so much sense. Like that is exactly what I would do. I'm like, I don't care about this sport, but
Yeah,
like if I know anything behind it, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I watched this documentary. Yeah,
yeah,
I totally resonate.
yeah.
I love that. So what I want to know, okay, let's get even more practical. Let's go into like tips. So if I am, let's say I want to do both of these, like back and forth. So if I'm a woman, which I am, and I'm in a relationship with a man, and I want to, like, if I want to, like, understand how to get my message across to him, let's say, like effective communication techniques to, like, talk to the masculine brain as a woman, what advice would you have?
Let's make it even more practical. Like, give me something you want specifically to communicate.
I have no
Like,
idea. This is just like a made up sort of scenario. I have no idea. But let's say I'm just pulling something out of the hat. Let's say I am upset about something. Okay, let's say I'm upset about something. There's something deep in my heart that I am upset about, and I'm just so in my emotions right now.
mhm,
But I want to articulate it to him in a way that is actually going to translate to his brain.
sure. Um, I think I think with a man, first of all, we're bad about um, almost writing a woman off if we feel like she's in the middle of being emotional, whether we mean to or not. I know for me, a lot of times it's something I have to be intentional about. If my wife is in the middle of being upset, um, and I think especially most men, there's like this immediate tendency to almost kind of roll your eyes and be like, "Oh, here we go," And so that's something you have to battle against as a man. That's not okay for a man to do, by the way. I'm not excusing that, but it's just kind of, I think, somewhat natural for a man. Um, so I think if it's possible to work through the emotions first, get the emotions out of your system, um, and then just sit them down. Like for me, what me and my wife try to do is like if we're in the middle of being upset, it never goes well. And to be fair, I think men do the same thing. It just comes out differently. Like ours comes out as anger, right? So, and I kind of wrote about this in one of my posts. If I'm in the middle of being angry and my wife comes and tries to just tell me I'm overreacting or I'm being unreasonable for what I'm angry about, like, first of all, most of the time when I'm angry, I know that I'm being unreasonable and I'm overreacting, right? So if she comes and tells me I'm overreacting while I'm in the midst of overreacting, that's not going to go well, right? Um, so for me, what I've told my wife when it comes to my emotions is like, Just let me be mad, let me get it out of my system, and then you can be more logical with me about it, and I'll be more approachable. Because when I'm in the middle of being emotional, the logic part of my brain is switched off, right? It's either or. I'm either emotional or logical. And so men do this too, in fairness. Um, but I think typically, if you're upset about something, number one, if you're in the middle of being highly emotional about it, it's probably not going to go well to try to communicate in that moment. Um, so the most effective way for me is, once the emotions are out of your system, to sit and calm down and say, hey, here's what happened, here's what I'm upset about, here's what I'm feeling. When you do this, it makes me feel this.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's possible, try to relate it to something that, flip it around. Like, you got upset at me when I did this particular thing and it made you feel this. Well, this is my version of when you did that, it made me feel this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so just to me, it's always really important to try to find where you can. One of the phrases that I really like, and I haven't written about it yet, is the essence of influence is agreement. So if you want to influence another person, you have to start with something you agree on and then work from there. And so that to me is, a key when you're trying to, as a woman, if you're trying to communicate with a man, is you've got to frame it in a way that he can relate to and understand, and then build off of it into your side that is more feminine that he may not relate to. You know,
Mm.
so if you start with something that, it's almost like, connect the dots. Like, you got to start with something that he can see the first dot, and then go about connecting it to the next dot and the next dot. And that's kind of how you build a bridge between how to communicate from the male mind to the female mind. Is you're gonna have to start in the middle and then work outwards. Um, and that's what I try to do in my writing, especially when I write content that's aimed towards women. I wrote the one today about how, men battle complacency, and women battle dissatisfaction. You know, and so the point of the post is, as a woman, it's not going to do you any good to, nitpick and tear him down about every little thing. That's not effective. Um, but if I just came at it like that, women would get their, feelings hurt. They would get triggered, probably, right?
Mm.
And so what I really made it about was, if you think about it, you know, women are dissatisfied with themselves just as much as they are with their man. I know my wife, no matter what she does, she never feels like it's enough. She always feels like there's something more she needs to be doing. She's just inherently hard to satisfy. It's hard for her to satisfy herself, and it's hard for me to satisfy her, right? Like, that's what we tend to do. Whereas men tend to be, whatever. It's not worth fighting over. That's why we won't communicate. It's like, it's not worth fighting over, right? We just have this tendency towards being lazy or complacent, right? So, um, I started off the whole dialogue with what I wrote today about how it's not just directed at a man, that dissatisfaction isn't healthy or effective. It's not effective when you're dissatisfied with yourself. It doesn't help you.
Mm.
It doesn't make you more productive. It doesn't solve anything, right? So, um, that to me is how we try to bridge the gap between communication. Is we can't start at the extremes. We have to start in the middle at the parts that we can relate to, and then build outwards from there. You know,
Yeah.
because men are emotional too. Ours are expressed differently. That's why I use the example of anger. you
Mm-hmm.
know Men aren't any more logical when it comes to being emotional than a woman is. It's just ours is anger instead of whatever emotions that, the woman happens to be feeling. Because, men are never allowed to feel anything but anger. That's the only emotion we're allowed to express,
Mm.
without losing our man card, since we're little boys. Like, if you're a little
Yeah.
boy, you know especially if you think back to, like, the 90s, dads, when they talk to their little boys, if he cried, he'd say, don't cry, be a man. If he got
Mm.
sad, it's don't be sad, be a man. Like, there weren't any emotions that dad told you not to feel other than anger.
Yeah. Mm.
It's the only one we're allowed to express. And so a lot of times that's the only, men get angry, and we're like, what are you so angry about? It's like, to be honest, it's not anger. It's just the only way I know how to express. It's really sadness, or I'm discouraged, or I'm frustrated, or I'm confused, or I'm overwhelmed. But
Mm-hmm.
as a man, you can't admit any of that stuff, because then you lose your man card. So
Mm.
you have to be angry about everything.
Yeah.
Um, So
Yeah.
it's just different ways of expressing things.
Yeah, I'm curious. Thank you. That's great. I'm curious now with the anger part though. Like you said, since men were boys, especially like in the 90s, that, don't cry, be a man, like, all of that stuff that leads to the only way that men can express emotions. And can I just add like a little disclaimer? We're generalizing here, people. Please don't get triggered. You have to in
Yeah.
today's society. It's like, okay, I'll put a
Oh yeah.
disclaimer at the beginning, whatever. But
Yeah.
like, what is the solution then? So if okay, if I'm going a bit all over the place with this, but okay, if I'm a parent, let's say, okay, I'm a parent, whether I'm a father or a mother, and I have a young boy. Okay. What is the healthy way then to nurture that boy in terms of like his emotions, right? So if the like what's the yeah, just any insight you have around that because I'm just
Yeah.
curious, right? Like it,
What's what's really interesting is that, my boys are just now, hitting like the puberty age, so they're starting to really kind of become a little more manly versus, because before you go through puberty, there's not a whole lot of difference between boys and girls, until testosterone or estrogen and progesterone get introduced. There's a lot of things are similar. Um, what's interesting with me is that I've been very aware of not trying to en- enforce that, like, oh, you're only allowed to be angry, and they
mm,
still default to anger. They get
mm,
mad when they're sad, and I've
mm-hmm,
never I've never told them to do that. In fact, I've tried to be very conscious of doing the opposite.
mm-hmm,
So it's interesting. I don't know if they're basing it off of how I behave because they only ever see me get mad. They don't see me get sad, because I was raised in that manner.
mm-hmm,
I don't know if it's cultural from movies or whatever, but it's like if they feel sad, they don't feel like they'll be sad in front of their mom, but they don't want me to see them be sad. And then
mm,
I'll find out a few days later that they were sad. My wife will tell me, "Oh, they were really sad about this." I'm like, they don't have to be ashamed of being sad in front of me. Like it's okay if they're sad. So um, I think for me, what's helped me, and I'm by no means an expert, but what's helped me is whenever they do feel emotional, they are emotional about something, which typically comes out as anger or at least frustration or being upset. Um, I try to name the actual emotion and say, "I know you're sad right now, and it's okay to be sad."
mm,
Or I know you're embarrassed right now, and it's okay to be embarrassed. We all do things that you know are embarrassing, right? Like
mm,
maybe and so a lot of times as a parent, you typically know the root of the emotion. If they got made fun of at school or their little girlfriend broke up with them or whatever it is, like you typically know what happened, and so you kind of have an idea like what they're actually feeling, regardless of what they're expressing.
mm-hmm,
Um, and so for me, I try to name the actual emotion and tell them that emotion is okay too. Like it's okay to be embarrassed. It's okay to be ashamed. And then when I mess up or when I screw something up, I try to be vocal about what I'm feeling with them too, to model it so that
mm,
they see that it's okay as a man to say, hey, I'm discouraged right now. I don't have everything figured out. Um, and I think it's important to be that way as a dad, because if you don't, then they're going to grow up thinking that if they get discouraged, that they're going to compare themselves to me and say, I never remember my dad being discouraged. So obviously something's wrong with me
mm,
because my dad was never discouraged, right? So if I'm discouraged, then I'm broken.
yeah,
That's the default. As a man, at least, that's what I went to is, um, I thought men never struggled with anything. I thought, I look at other men when I was a young man, especially like, dude, that dude never gets tired. He never stops working. He never,
mm,
when we really just don't know the whole story because men are just have this facade up all the time of toughness and resilience and you know confidence or whatever. And I do feel those things. I'm a confident guy, but I'm not confident not 24/7. Like, that's not human.
yeah,
you know and so I just try to be um, very proactive about explaining what's going on to them. So if I'm and I think the big thing is, and I think parents in general, we have this tendency to play the role of a parent
Mhm.
instead of just being human in front of them.
Yeah.
And so, like, an easy way to explain it is like, you know, most adults cuss, right? But we don't cuss in front of our kids because it's like, oh, or most adults will have a drink, but they won't drink in front of their kids, right? And it's like,
Mm.
I'm not saying start cussing in front of your kids or start drinking in front of your kids, but it's the concept, right? And I think it's true that we have these. We're not just ourselves in front of our kids. You
Mhm.
know, we're this role of somebody that we want them to be like, which
Mm.
has good intentions, but what it ends up happening is that they end up comparing themselves to someone that's not realistic
Yeah.
because they don't see you just being human in front of them, especially as a dad, you know. And so when I struggle or when I'm upset or whatever, I make sure to go out of my way to be vocal with them about it. Like, guys, I'm just struggling today. I'm having a hard time. I'm discouraged. Here's what happened at work, or here's what happened with, with my health. If I'm having, whatever, um, just so that they know, you know, I went through a phase where I had some pretty bad depression at one point. Um, and and people have asked me like, well, how did the boys handle it? And how did you hide it from them? I'm like, I didn't,
Mm.
if when they get older and they go through this, I don't want them to think something's wrong with them. I want them to know, like, oh, I remember when my dad went through this. It's
Mm.
okay that I'm going through this. It doesn't make me less.
Yeah.
And so I try to be really proactive about sitting down and saying, guys, I'm not myself right now. I don't know what's going on, but I don't feel right. And I'm just sad. And I'm telling you this because someday, if you go through this, I want you to know that it doesn't mean you're not a man,
Mm.
that it's okay to struggle and it's okay to go through things. And I
Mm.
think it shows them, seeing me go through that and knowing that I went through that, but then also seeing me get on the other side of that. Um, I just think living in front of them is really important instead
Wow.
of pretending to be something.
That is so powerful. Thank you. And yeah, it's so true. It's like the other thing I was thinking as you were talking was like kids pick up on things, right? And if you're not
Oh yeah.
transparent with them, then what are they supposed to fill in the blanks with? It just gets confusing and life gets confusing. So I really loved
Mhm.
that the explanation. I'm sure so many people can benefit from that. Thank you. I loved that. It was super healing to hear, actually. It is, right?
Well, and
It's
what happens, I think, is like kids do pick up on things, right? And then when they become teenagers, what typically happens between a parent and child is the teenager rebels
mm.
and they go and they do their own thing, right? Because on a deep level, they know their parents are hypocrites. They know their parents aren't holding themselves to the same standard that they're
Oh,
holding me to, right? I mean, think about it. It's like I'm not stupid. I know you cuss when I'm not around. I know you've had a drink before. I know you went and partied when you were a teenager. You're trying to make me be somebody that you weren't even being.
oh
Like,
my
so
God.
no, you're a hypocrite,
Yes, that's so
right? Like,
true.
so quit pretending to be somebody you're not and be a human being with them, and you'll have influence with them. You won't lose them when they're teenagers because they are going to pick up on that. If you're a hypocrite, they're going to pick up on it, and they're just going to hide it from you. Like,
I love
then you
that.
have no influence at all.
It's so true. It's just like
You know?
it's just like the basics of like like relationship dynamics. It's just like respect and honesty and transparency and not
Yeah.
trying to be somebody that you're not. I love that.
Yeah. Well, I had somebody tell me when I first had kids, and it was the best parenting advice I ever got. He said, um, "Don't forget that your kids are little people too."
Mm.
So I think a lot of times as parents, we have this tendency to view our kids as like not view them, but we unintentionally treat them like they're our little soldiers. You know,
Yeah.
instead of realizing like at the end of the day, they're people, and if you treat them disrespectfully, just because you can treat them disrespectfully doesn't mean that it's not going to have a consequence. Like, they don't have to listen to you. Like,
Mm.
they might have to obey you. That
Mm.
doesn't mean that they're actually listening. That doesn't mean that they respect you.
Mm.
So for me, I've always tried to remember, like, at the end of the day, you still have to treat them the way you would want to be treated. Like,
Mhm.
just because they don't have any power to punish you if you don't treat them the way they want to be treated doesn't mean that you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Like, don't talk to them in a way that you wouldn't want to be talked to. Like, no, you wouldn't want somebody yelling at you and like pointing out how stupid you are. Like, nobody would reacts well to that.
Yeah.
And then we get, and then a kid, you're mean to your kid and you yell and scream at them, and then you get onto them for being disrespectful. It's like, if I talk to you that way, you'd be disrespectful. Like, come on, like they're people just like you. You gotta, they're just little people.
For sure. For sure. I love that so much. And something that's coming up as you're speaking, it's like there's respect and then there's listening to you because I fear you. And they're two very, very, very different things. And like
Hmm.
exactly like you said, when they grow up as teenagers, and I'm talking from my experience being that child, right? When
Oh
you
yeah,
grow up as a teenager, it's like, I'm not listening to you. Like, I love
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Um, you mentioned something it was in one of your posts actually, and I really loved that. So I'd love to touch on it about like challenging them because you know that like you're setting them up for the world as men, and like challenging in that fine line of like challenge versus being like I think you said like a drill sergeant or something like that in your post. I'd love if you
Yeah.
could elaborate on that.
Yeah. I think for me, as far as the drill sergeant thing, like, especially, and I can't speak for all men. I'm a very driven, like focused, like goal oriented, and like not goal oriented, very task oriented man. So I go about my day, and it's like, what's the next thing? Like, what's the next mission to accomplish, right? Like, and in my personal life, that's served me really, really well. Where I think a lot of men struggle is when it turns on you, because if you think about it like a flashlight or a laser or something, when I laser focus on something personal, whether it's business or sales or my fitness or writing on Instagram, whatever it might be, um, it's nothing but beneficial for me to have that laser focus.
Hmm.
It's done nothing but make me successful. Whatever I point that at helps me. As soon as I point that at other people, though, it becomes destructive. Like, when I point that same expectation on my wife, she just withers, because, you know, not because she can't handle it, but because maybe she's just not focused on the same thing I've focused on, right? So it's not that there's things that she focuses on that she's better than me at, right? So it's just a matter of, you can't expect everybody to have the same level of priority that you do for the same things that you do. Um, and so for me, I had to really be cautious. It was like this thing that served me so well in my personal life, my ability to focus. Um, it just made my wife and my kids just wither, because it was just like this. So like I was just a drill sergeant. I expected them to be like me when that's what I'm for. Like they're kids. They're not going to be like me. And I think a lot of the stuff that men do with little boys, especially as far as like be a man and suck it up and be tough, I don't think it's appropriate. Like, until they have testosterone in their system, they don't have, like, that is what makes a man manly. Is like, that is what gives us that drive and that focus and that desire to conquer and all those typical traditional masculine things. Those are usually triggered by a flood of testosterone in the body. You can't expect an 8-year-old boy to be that way. When That's just wrong. You know what I mean? Like, that's not fair. To expect that you can teach them certain things, teach them certain lessons, but you've also got to give them time to mature into that. Also, I don't know if that answers your question, but
No, it does. So what age would you start really like I'm just thinking out loud now. What age would you really start to challenge them? Like when does that testosterone kick in and when would you start like challenging them a bit more? I'm just thinking from like yeah, I'm parenting perspective. I have no idea. I don't have a little boy child right now. I'm just
yeah,
thinking out loud.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, yeah. Um, I think it's just progressive. I think you can challenge them before they have testosterone, but as far as expecting them to have that resilience and that determination and that push through, it's just
Mm,
not there. You have
yeah.
to teach them that. It's not going to be natural. So I very much challenge them, but I don't. To me, there's a difference between challenging and testing. Like, testing is like seeing if they can do something, but waiting to look for their failure. You know,
Mm,
whereas challenging is just constantly kind of gradually pushing them further and further out of their comfort zone.
Mm.
But as a parent, you have to do that in a way that's like it provides them like a controlled environment to where they can learn to take risk and they can learn to challenge themselves. But you're there as backup, like the safety net, like training wheels, right?
Uh-huh.
Like um, that to me is kind of the role. And I think too many parents go too far to one extreme or the other.
Mm-hmm.
We isolate them so they don't feel any pain, and that's terrible for a kid, because then the world's not going to be that way, and they're not ready for how to deal with adversity or getting their feelings hurt or getting triggered or whatever. It's like that's where a lot of that comes from. They haven't had to deal with anything hard before. They haven't had to work through like a healthy way to deal with getting your feelings hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all get our feelings hurt. There's a healthy way to do it, and there's an unhealthy way to do it.
Uh-huh.
I think what you're seeing now in culture is a result of people just not knowing the appropriate healthy way to deal with pushback or different opinions, or getting your feelings hurt, or just when my boys get their feelings hurt, I try to explain to them like they probably didn't mean it that way. They probably weren't trying to hurt your feelings. I know you feel that way. You're justified in feeling that way. But
Mm-hmm.
it's also important to not necessarily always take it personally,
Mm.
because a lot of times they didn't even mean to. Like they're just people are going about their life, and they're at a certain level, expecting everybody not to hurt your feelings um, is too much ego. Like not everybody in the world is walking around thinking about me. Like they might just be thinking about their grocery list, and they didn't even realize that what they said might come across the wrong way to me. Like they might not be like, not everything is them trying to say something passive aggressively, to send me some subtle message. Like
Mm-hmm.
more often than not, they just weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
And you gotta be willing to just give people a little bit more grace and benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Thank you. I have one more parenting related question, I think.
Yeah,
And I mean, it's just a curious question. So, what advice would you have for, let's say, a single mother that's raising a boy? Do you have
yeah,
any advice there? Because yeah, I'm just so
yeah,
curious.
yeah. I get that question a lot. I plan on writing about that. So there's two different parts. There's learning about masculinity, and there's learning about what a man is from an intellectual standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then there's feeling on the inside this certainty that you're a man. Those are two different things. You can know how to ride a bike without knowing that you can ride the bike, right? So I think a woman can and should um, teach, a single mom, for instance, can and should teach a little boy about manhood. Even if it's just from a woman's perspective. Like women have a lot of valuable feedback on manhood that men don't necessarily have. Like if a man wasn't trustworthy, or a man didn't keep his word to you, or a man didn't whatever, you can teach your son like you better not be that way when you grow up. A real man is there when he's expected to be. He doesn't cut and run and leave you hanging, right? Like a real man is trustworthy. Like here's how the men in my life have treated me, and here's how I expect you to treat women when you're older. If you say you're going to do something, you follow through. Like
Mm.
there's nothing about those lessons about integrity, being honorable, keeping your word, those things. There's nothing about those lessons that a woman can't teach a little boy,
Mm-hmm.
um, and those are important. However, at some point, and again, if you look back, like historically, you know, he's not gonna know he's a man. Like when he's around a bunch of other men, he's not gonna know he fits. He's part of the crowd, and he's been accepted by his peer group, because that's the distinction. It's like if you're a single mom, you have to realize that his peer group when he's 25 years old, it's not going to be other single moms. It's going to be other young men.
Mm.
And so for him to feel accepted in his own peer group, he's got to be validated and accepted by the peer group. And there are
Mm.
certain things that the peer group enforces and expects in order for you to be a member. And there's a reason, you go back through history, all warrior cultures across time and across that had no interaction with one another. There was always kind of this ritual, this coming of age, and like if you were going to become a knight, you started off as a squire and you worked your way up, and then at some point there's like a formula for it. There's a certain set of values that the peer group expects you to portray, whether it's honor or loyalty or trustworthiness or whatever, right? Then there's some sort of challenge that you have to conquer and overcome, a
Mm.
quest. And then at the end of that, your peer group recognizes that you've graduated from being a squire to being a knight. You've
Mhm.
gone on your quest, and then the key is that the other knights come to you and say, "We, you are now part of us. We see you as our peer, not as a boy, but as a man." Native Americans had very similar rituals where they were taken away from mom at the age of 12, and they went to live with the warriors, but they served a certain role, and then once they learned certain skills, they were sent to go. You've got to go to this you know place that's 20 miles away and bring back a tree branch from this tree that only grows in this spot. And when you bring it back, we know you've got the skill set and you're ready to be part of us.
Uh-huh.
These are things that have been true across all throughout history, across all cultures, that a man has to have that coming of age
Mm.
ritual. But so for the single moms, I would say expose them to masculine stuff. Have them read biographies of great men, so that they get inside the minds, like especially autobiographies where a man is writing in the first person, where he talks about the challenges that he's faced and the things he's overcome, and expose him you know to the thoughts and ideas of masculine men.
Mm.
Um, there's you can learn a lot of lessons about masculinity from watching movies like Gladiator and Braveheart. Like, how did
Mm.
those men behave when they were
Love
faced
it.
with adversity, right? Like,
Mm.
so there there's a really important distinction, I think, there for single moms, in terms of, like, you can get them 90% of the way there as a single mom just by making sure you don't try to make him like you, and make sure you understand he's going to be different from you. So he needs to be reading autobiographies of men, and being exposed to masculine things that speak to his heart, of being wanting to be a hero, right? Like, his heart's different. He wants different things.
Mm.
Exposing him to movies like Gladiator, putting him into things that challenge him, where he has to overcome hard things, like whether it's martial arts or whether it's sports, or some activity that forces him to dig deep and push through hard things. You can do a lot of those things as a woman. There will be a man that comes along, whether it's a boss or a coach or even his peer group, that at some point, hopefully, especially if you've taught him how to be honorable and you've taught him how to, like, you don't have to have a live in-person role model to know what kind of man you want to aspire to be like. You can aspire to be like William Wallace and Braveheart. Like, there's
Mm.
lessons to be learned there. And so, you know what? I'm going to be like him. I'm going to keep my word. I'm going to be diplomatic. I'm going to be intelligent, but I'm going to be fierce at the same time. I'm going to be a warrior poet, right? Like, there's nothing. That's a role model.
Mhm.
If a little boy has nothing else but that, that can be a role model. If your mom uses that and says, "Hey, what would William Wallace do?" If you have nothing else to compare it to, watch that movie and then use that as kind of the paradigm for, what would that man do? You try to be like that. If that's all you have, that's better than nothing.
I love it.
uh, so that would be my advice: is just expose them to masculine things, help them really paint the picture of, like, what kind of man do you want to be? Like, your dad ran off and left. This is William Wallace. This is what a real man is. Would he have ran off and left? Now
Uh-huh.
what kind of man do you want to be? And start
Yeah.
really painting that picture in his mind. And then from there, if you've exposed him to that, I feel like he'll end up finding men that respect him and admire him, that will validate him and welcome him to the peer group. You know,
Mm.
um, he might have to seek those things out intentionally, but I think a lot of moms are more worried about it than they need to be, if they are exposing him to masculine things as
Mhm.
he's growing up. Like, a woman can do a lot to teach a man what it is to be a man.
Uh-huh.
Um, they just can't make him feel like one.
Yeah. A question that's coming up for me right now, and thank you, that was brilliant. I got chills. I was like, yes. What came up for me actually as I was thinking, and I referenced this movie in my last podcast, and I'm referencing it again. 300, you know, where he goes and like
Oh yeah,
fights the wolf as his like
yeah,
initiation, and he comes back and he's a
yeah,
warrior. Yeah, that's what was
yeah,
in my head. Um,
yeah.
okay,
There's
so
a reason that theme comes up so often. I
uh-huh.
mean, it is, I mean, our oldest known story, I think, is the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that was like, I don't know, 4000 BC, and it was the exact same story. It's, go out and conquer something. Like that's
Yeah.
there's a reason that's so prominent throughout all of our history. It's a real thing.
Mm. What I want to hear you answer actually, because as you were talking about it, like a question popped in my head that some people might actually have, like, or just have no idea. Like, why is this important? Why is masculinity in the world, like healthy masculinity in the world, why is that important? I'd love to hear your insight.
Oh man. Um, why is a healthy relationship important to a woman? It's just that something doesn't feel right if you don't have it. If you don't have it, not just a romantic relationship, but healthy friendships or whatever. Like women are very relational, right?
Hmm.
Like if you there's certain things that the lack of it makes you feel incomplete.
Mm.
Um, I think masculinity is important to men. Not not there's a lot of things I could say as far as the effects it has on the world, all that's the cultural stuff. But there's plenty of people talking about that. I think for me, if I'm going to try to give a nuanced answer that's not you know cliche, I would say the reason it's masculinity is important is that if a boy or a man doesn't know he's a man, the lack of that feeling will leave him constantly feeling like something's missing. Um, and I think you see it when the unfortunate, what we're seeing when so many people hear the word masculinity and you hear the word toxic masculinity, it is, that's a boy that doesn't know he's a man trying to feel like one. So if a man that knows he's a man is not threatened by a strong woman, he doesn't feel the need to go, be conquests, with sleeping with as many women as he can. He doesn't feel the need to, get in this constant measuring contest of like who's got the biggest house and the nicest car and just all these things that men do that hurt other people. Um, they tend to be expressions of them trying to prove something to themselves because they haven't been told like you have what it takes. You are a man. You have been recognized in the peer group as a grown man, and so fighting all so many of these things. There's a time for a man to be a warrior. There's a time for a man to stand up and fight. Um, but a lot of our exposure to the fighting that you see like at a bar after at 2 o'clock in the morning or whatever, like these are all just expressions of deep down a man like has to know on the inside the answer to this really important question, like do I have what it takes? Like, and if a man doesn't know deep down I have what it takes, then he's going to seek all these destructive ways to see. He's going to put himself in all these destructive situations to see if he has what it takes.
Mm.
And so I think the fact that masculinity is important because if they don't know they're a man, toxic masculinity is the result of the lack of authentic masculinity.
Mm. Yeah, for sure. Thank you. I love that. And okay, so let's say I'm just throwing examples out there. Let's say I'm a 30, I don't know, 34, 35, whatever, year old man. And I didn't have a great relationship with my father. Maybe I didn't have a father, or maybe my father was abusive or whatever. And I hadn't had a strong male role model. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm in my 30s or even my 20s or whatever age. I'm an adult man now,
Yeah,
and I'm still struggling with this concept. I still, it hasn't landed yet fully for me. What
yeah,
advice, what tips, where do I start? How do I start? Where do I go?
yeah. Um, I mean, I think step one is you have to make a decision as a man, like, I'm gonna figure this out. I'm not gonna stay where I'm at, not knowing and just wondering and just treading water where I'm at. Like first I'm gonna pick a destination, say I'm gonna figure this out. That's the
Mhm.
starting point. 'Cause, I mean, most men that decide to answer that question end up answering it, you know. So if assuming a man has made that commitment, like I'm going to figure this out, what I'm doing isn't healthy. It's not healthy to be, a man that's soft and unsure of himself. A woman's not going to want that. Like that's just there's no place for a man like that. That there's I'm going to say there's no place. It's very difficult for a man that's soft and indecisive and all that stuff to find, anything affirming in the world. Like, women aren't going to respect him. His bosses aren't going to respect him. Like, it's just not going to happen, right? So you don't want to stay soft. You don't want to be over masculine either, because then we know what happens when you have that. So you have to make that decision of like, I'm going to figure out how to be a fully conscious, healthy, masculine man. I'm not going to stay where I'm at. So that's the first step. The second step is really at that point to just immerse yourself in what it means to be a man, not just try to chase whatever, you know, you're told is masculine. Like, oh, I'm going to go get big muscles. Well, you can go get big muscles, but it's not going to answer the question of do you have what it takes? Like there's not it's you've got to do the inner work to figure out why you don't feel like a man, and what is going to answer that question. What is it that you're afraid of? What is it that you haven't dealt with that you need to fulfill? If you have issues with your dad, like you've got to get healing from that, like whether it's either realizing you're enough or confronting him or whatever. And it's just committing to becoming a fully well-rounded, you know filling in the holes in whatever part of that you're missing. And that can be through books, um, that can be through podcasts. There's a lot of things you can do to learn what a real man is, what an authentic man is, because that's where you're going to learn what you're missing. A lot of men, they know they're missing something, but they don't know what they're missing. And so being exposed to the books and the podcasts and the content, that kind of tells you, oh, okay, yeah, like I'm about to write a post on what it means to be an honorable man. Like there's a lot of men running around that would be honorable if they knew if someone had laid it out. Like, here's what honorable means. Just follow this, and then you'll be, oh, okay, yeah. And I get a lot of good feedback from men that say, man, I've never thought about it like that. But now that you point that out, that's something I'm going to start doing, right? Nobody ever told me that before, but that resonates with me now that I've been told. So I think you have to expose yourself to the world of what it means, just so you know what you're missing. You don't know what to fix if nobody's pointed it out.
Mm.
And then get involved um, with other men that can welcome you into that, peer group, and say, have men in your life that speak affirmation to you, that say, hey, because a lot of times there's a lot of men out there that are wondering, like, do I have what it takes? They don't know the answer to that question. And they do have everything it takes. They just have never been told that. They've never had another man be like, bro, you're awesome. Like, I don't know why you think you're not good enough. Like you got a great wife, you're married, you got great kids, like you got a business, like there's nothing else you're missing. Like you
Mm.
checked all the boxes, man. And sometimes just having somebody tell you that and knowing you're not missing anything is all you really need. Like, oh, okay, wow, like, you know,
Yeah.
I've never felt that before.
Mm.
And I
Yeah.
think the reason it's important that another man tells you is that on some level, if it's our wife, if it's our mom, you know, on some level, we know that women are inclined to feel sorry for us and tell us what we want to hear. Whereas if another man tells you, like, bro, you're not missing out on anything, like, you're a grown ass man, like,
Mm.
we know that a man wouldn't just say that. We know if a man says it to us, we earned it. And
Mm.
on some level, no matter who the woman is or what the situation is, part of us wonders, like, does she really mean it? And number two, it's like, yeah, but you're not the peer group I need that affirmation from.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just like if 100 men came up and told you, like, hey, yeah, you're a woman, like, is that really going to land? Versus if a bunch of other women are like, I really admire you and respect you, like, it's just different. right? Like your
Yeah.
peer group is different.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that example. Thank you. Oh, this has been so good. I want to go into. I probably think this is like probably the last question, but it's so fitting because how could we not address this on this podcast, the Radiantly Awakened podcast, as you said. So you wrote a post, you had a whole series on radiance, amazing,
Yes.
and one of them was her radiance is your responsibility. Yeah. So, I
Yep.
mean, I'm just going to shut up now and I'm just going to let you talk. Like, elaborate on that, please.
Yeah, so I'm way better at talking about stuff that I've written. It's way more concise. I know I'm long-winded. Um, so when I first got married, I didn't really know what does it mean to be a good husband? Like I'm a husband and I want to be good at it, but I don't really have like a target to aim at.
Hmm.
And one thing I thought was interesting was that I noticed there were very, very few of them, but there were some out there that there were these women that were in their 70s, right? Like their their youthful beauty has faded away long ago, right? But they still had this like inner glow that I referred to as radiance. There's just like this inner beauty and like this peace and this serenity and there's something that's just hard to even quantify that was just like radiating out from within them. And that was I just spent a lot of time thinking about like what is it about those women that have that and the conclusion I came to is that um, they had been loved well. They hadn't. You see so many women that just you can tell by looking at them that they're beaten up and they're discouraged and that they just haven't been appreciated and they haven't been just loved the way that they should have been. And it's evident just in their face and their demeanor and just the way that everything about them, they just feel dull because they've just been just beaten up by life. And so for me, that's the kind of the what I compare and contrast to is basically like as a man, if your wife is losing her that inner glow, that means she's taking things on that you should be carrying. Like you're built to carry the punishment and the difficulties and the hard things in life. That's what wakes a man up. That's what makes me want to get out of bed in the morning. And that's the distinction is that it's not about who can go take on and do hard things. It's about what it costs. You know, my wife can go do hard things. My wife is a badass, but it costs her something, right? Like it's not easy for her to go do it. She has to really dig deep, and it costs her radiance to go do that, like a bank account. Um, and if I can take those things on and preserve her radiance, then that's my responsibility to do that. Because because I am built for that. It doesn't cost me anything, you know. Um, and that's kind of my goal is when we're old, I want her to have that inner beauty, and I want to just be barely crawling across the finish line. Like I've done everything I could to protect her from the hard things in life so that she could flourish. Um, and that's something that given the response to the post, it's not just something that appeals to the heart of a woman. It appeals to the heart of a man too. A man wants to be a hero. A man wants to sacrifice for, the woman that he loves. There's that part's in Braveheart too, in 300, and Gladiator, right? Like, men forget that when we talk about the tough stuff, but those men love their women, you know, all of them. And they sacrificed for their women, and they would have done anything to protect their woman, right? Like the whole movie Braveheart is because somebody killed his woman, right? We forget that, and so that to me is the essence of her radiance is your responsibility. Is that should appeal to the heart of a man too, to take on those hard things and like I want to be just a beat to hell when I'm an old man because I worked my ass off taking care of her and loving her the right way so that she can still be radiant. Um, and that's the heart of that's not just women love hearing that, but that's the heart of a man too. It really is. Is he wants to be your hero. If you look at little boys, they run around, they want to be heroes, and they don't. We don't get a chance to be heroes for the whole world, but that's our wives are. She's my chance to be a hero. She might be my only chance to be a hero, so I'm going to make the most of it.
Mm. I'm like, I'm like smiling, crying. It's so
Well, good.
it's so nice to hear.
You're gonna make
Ah,
me embarrassed now.
no, no, it's the words I want to come out is wildly refreshing. It's so nice. Honestly, oh my gosh, thank you
And
so
my
much.
honestly, my hope with that isn't for it to be refreshing. It's for us to remember
Mm,
that that's who we've always been. These
yeah,
stories aren't new.
yeah.
You know, the only time these stories are new is right now. You know, at every other point in history, you read any books on history, like, you know, the Count of Monte Cristo, you know, he's getting revenge because somebody stole the woman that he loved. You know, Shakespeare, like all the way back to, you know, you can look at, you know, Helen of Troy, like the War of Troy was fought over a woman. Like
Mm,
these are not new. They shouldn't be refreshing. These are things that are more, should be a remembrance that have
mm,
always been true that
yeah,
modern society has just seemed to forget, you know. And so I'm just trying to remind people who we've always been more than I
mm,
am trying to do something new.
yeah,
This is not new. This is a very old theme.
yeah, yeah. So good. Thank you so much, Ryan. This has just been amazing. Like we covered so many things and it's just been I have no words. I'm just like amazing. That's all I've got right now. So, I know
That's
you're
good.
writing a book. You're writing a book.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I'm writing a book called The Wisdom of Kings. That's my last name is King. And so it's kind of a play on words. The premise of the book is um, I didn't know how to be a man when I was 22 when I first started, you know, trying to become a man. I just felt very unprepared. And so when I found out I was having a son, you know, from then on, I've just been keeping like a running note in my phone of like, as I learned an important lesson that I wanted to make sure they were aware of, I've just been keeping notes for 13 years of all the lessons that I've learned that I want to teach them. And most of them, my boys still aren't old enough to be taught those things yet. So it's still in progress. But the Wisdom of Kings is a play on our family legacy. Like I want to write something that I hand down to them that they have as a handbook, not just to learn, but to teach their kids as well. Kind of a modern day proverbs of like just, you know, whether I sell any of them or not, I just want to write it for my boys to just have something that's like, you know, I hope 3 or 4 generations from now, like this is our family legacy of like this is who we are. You know,
Yeah.
this is who our family is. This is our identity.
Mm,
And so that's what it's a it's really I looked on you know, when I was trying to come up with titles or what I wanted to have as the theme when I got on Amazon, like there's like 3 books the word wisdom in the title, and most of them are about the book of Proverbs in the Bible. Like there's just nothing really out there on like just across the board, like here's how to handle conflict, here's how to have a healthy relationship, here's how just an introduction to just the key things in life about like here's how to make good decisions, you know, here's how to be disciplined, like so many of those things. And so that's really what I want to hand down is just like a book on wisdom that's like an introduction for a young man or a young woman. And I think a lot of like 90% of the lessons of what I write about appeal to women too. Um, is really, you know, just like an introduction to where if you're 22 years old and you don't know where to start, here's something that will give you the basics of that will this will get you headed in the right direction and give you a solid foundation to build off of.
yeah. I can't wait. It's gonna be
Yeah,
amazing. I'm so
yeah.
stoked. All right. So I'm gonna leave your Instagram in the show notes. So everybody, make sure that you're following Ryan on Instagram because you will not regret it. It's so amazing. The Wisdom of Kings on Instagram. Is there anything else that you've got going on? Anywhere else people can find you?
No, right now it's all gone way faster than I ever expected, and so it's all I can do just to manage the Instagram right now.
Yeah.
So I'm working on the other stuff on, you know, a newsletter, and I think I'm going to probably do an ebook after I'm done. So I wrote the Radiance series. I'm now writing a sequel to that called um, Nourish His Vitality, and so it's vitality and radiance are the two kind of play on words, the
Mm,
polarity thing. So I'm in the middle of writing the Vitality series, and I should be done with that in about a month. And I think at that point, I'll probably release like a free ebook about just like the radiance and responsibility thing that's kind of a short-term project that I'll probably tackle here pretty soon. So I'm trying to play catch up with all the media stuff. So yeah, right now it's just Instagram, but
Great. I love it.
yeah,
Thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us today. And I
yeah.
appreciate it so much wisdom, so many things. I'm just amazed. I'm overwhelmed in the best way possible. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.